In a long conversation with a Globe reporter about a book I've just written, it comes around to the Ghomeshi affair. And I'm trying to express an idea, the idea being that celebrity in our business and in show business equals power. And when you have a large differential in power relationships with a celebrity at the top and ordinary people at the bottom, there is a space in there for abuse. Now, unfortunately, in one sentence, I mentioned three names: Ghomeshi, Mansbridge, and Zosky, and in the context of people having power. And as part of that statement, I said, and then sometimes it crosses the line. Well, I was talking about what Gian is alleged to have done. Unfortunately, the two Peters are in the same sentence.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. John Downs in for Adrian Battrell. Well, from Ghomeshi Gate to Mansbridge Gate, doesn't have quite the same ring to it, to be honest, but we got the stories, both these stories, well, generally from the same person. Jesse Brown is an independent journalist, and he's the man behind Canadaland.com, and joins us on the line. And Jesse, one thing I've got to ask you off the top, we're just getting word now that Gian Ghomeshi has dropped his $55 million suit. Any surprise there?
No surprise that he's dropped it, but there's also reporting from CBC that they have settled with him and are paying his costs. So I'm a little surprised by that. I'm waiting to see exactly what that means, but that certainly made me throw up in my mouth a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, the term we're hearing being used is withdrawn. The suit was withdrawn, so the cost thing is rather interesting. Let me ask you about the latest here with Lyndon McIntyre. He seems to be saying that there is a narrative here the CBC top brass is putting forward that is not consistent with the truth.
Yeah, he's saying that very explicitly. That's right.
So tell us, what is it exactly that he is saying did not happen that the CBC top brass, including, I guess it would be Jennifer Harwood, is claiming?
Well, his particular bone to pick with the most recent developments are that Harwood has essentially laid out a chronology of events wherein, Lyndon misspeaks, she bans him from CBC airwaves, and then he apologizes. And then all is right with the world once again, and he's allowed back on the air. That's not what happened. As soon as Lyndon realized that he had misspoken, as soon as he saw in print that the possibility for confusion that maybe he was equating what Ghomeshi did with Mansbridge's abuses was there, he immediately emailed Mansbridge and apologized, and only found out the next day that he'd been banned from the CBC. And apparently Mansbridge, he sent him a quick email saying thanks for the apology, which I don't know if that means I accept your apology, but yeah. If Mansbridge had anything to do or was aware, and it's hard to imagine that he wasn't aware, that Lyndon was later banned from the CBC, and also that there were attempts to actually pull Lyndon's last report from the airwaves, which, journalism that CBC paid for and important journalism, there's actually a vengeance campaign to get that pulled. All of that happened after he apologized to Mansbridge. So the idea that he had been rapped on the knuckles and then said, oh, I'm sorry, that's the part that he says is incorrect. There's another part as well.
Well, and there's more to this story that I think a lot of Canadians would find rather strange. Jennifer Harwood is the managing editor of CBC News Network. She's married to Mark Harrison, who's executive producer of The National. So her husband then contacts another boss of the Fifth Estate, Jim Williamson, apparently, and he was the one who demanded that the McIntyre piece be pulled, and that was a no-go. I mean, all this kind of going on behind the scenes, there seems to be a very incestuous nature to this relationship.
Absolutely, and I think that what we're seeing here is laid bare and exposed to some of the inner workings where there are tons of really responsible, competent journalists at the CBC just trying to do their jobs and report the news. But there is this layer of management who are all very chummy with each other. Many of them are married to each other, who seem to feel that the airwaves are theirs to use for whatever purpose, personal or otherwise. If that means protecting Peter Mansbridge's reputation by trying to get a piece of journalism pulled, or banning somebody like Lyndon McIntyre from the airwaves for daring to speak out about some of this stuff, then they don't seem to have the slightest hesitation to do so, and they even seem surprised when people in the public or other journalists like myself point out how radically unprofessional and unacceptable that is.
We just got a tweet there from Neil MacDonald. He put out saying, "All right, spare me. Really, Lyndon McIntyre is acting like some self-righteous horse's ass. His humble brag is insufferable nonsense." So now you've got Neil MacDonald, who's a really seasoned pro with the CBC, mostly out of Washington, who's now weighing in on Team Mansbridge. This seems to be, is there two different camps, and you've got one people on one side, another people on another side, and who makes up those camps?
You know what? To this idea that there's some sort of infighting here, the only people on the other side of the story are on-camera personalities, arguably celebrity journalists at the CBC, who are all affiliated with Mansbridge and who see the writing on the wall that there is a problem with celebrity culture at the CBC, and nobody else who read, I mean, I read McIntyre's original comments. I didn't think that he was equating Ghomeshi with Mansbridge. I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was saying that Mansbridge is no shrinking violet, and that he can act poorly and even abusively to his staff as well. I didn't think that meant that he was saying that Mansbridge commits the same crimes that Ghomeshi is alleged of committing. So nobody in the public said, "How dare you say that about Peter Mansbridge?" It was just Peter Mansbridge and people around him who took offense to that.
It seemed to be people making that link and choosing to make that link. You have a source who you spoke to who said, and this is very important because it does define the culture, if they're willing to throw Lyndon under the bus, imagine what they do to a nobody who complained about Mansbridge.
That's exactly it. And we just saw how they were able to look the other way and tolerate somebody like Ghomeshi, who, they didn't know the full extent of what he's alleged to be up to, but they knew a lot about really unacceptable stuff that was happening there. And the culture was such that a lot of people who were vulnerable, who were temporary workers, interns, contract workers, couldn't say boo about it. And even though there were some mechanisms in place, none of them dared to use them because that would mean the end of them. So they come out of that scandal and they say, okay, well, we've cut off the cancerous arm here, but everything else is okay. And meanwhile, we see the situation where somebody, even like Lyndon McIntyre, I mean, whose work, his reputation, I have no personal friendship with him or anything like that. I admire the hell out of him, and you don't hear anybody saying anything negative about his work or about working with him personally, and he's been there for decades. So he says some mild things about Mansbridge, and immediately the whole institution throws him under the bus. So what does that mean if there is, in fact, and let's just imagine this crazy hypothetical, that maybe there's an intern somewhere who has something to say about somebody like Peter Mansbridge or a contractor backfill producer who had something happen to them. Are they going to come forward now? I mean, does the CBC even want to know if this is still going on with other personalities?
Well, that's the question, and it comes down to whether or not the top brass there is delusional or being dishonest. So which do you think it is?
I don't think anyone there is delusional. I think that they have to recognize on some level that there's a culture there that goes beyond Jean Ghomeshi and Q, who, Ghomeshi was created by them in many ways. What we've yet to see is a true desire to take a full account and full responsibility and actually change things. They started off that way when this broke. Heather Conway was sort of like taking the lead and saying, we are going to get to the bottom of this. And then very quickly, it started to be about circling the wagons and protecting their personalities. And the big unanswered question for me, and this is a question for Heather Conway as much as anybody else, is Ghomeshi alleges that when he showed the CBC executives evidence that he had committed a crime, that he had seriously injured a young woman, they gave him the option of walking away and claiming that he had quit and saying that maybe it was because his father had passed, and they wouldn't contradict that story. Now, in my eyes, that, which they have yet to deny, is an allegation of possibly a criminal conspiracy to keep information from the public and to cover up a crime. And I want to know which executives knew about that.
Is this still the tip of the iceberg? I mean, I'm guessing you're not slowing down.
Well, there's no shortage being written about this or reported on this, but like I say, that question in particular and which CBC executives knew what and when are still questions that I'm not seeing. I mean, in part it's because they're just refusing to answer these questions, but I'm not seeing enough scrutiny about those questions. And, I would be quite happy to move on. There's plenty, I cover the media in its entirety, and I would be very happy to move on from this story to some others. But as long as there are strands here that are not getting addressed, I'm continuing to investigate this.
How do we address the whole issue with the culture at the CBC? I mean, some people say you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe the feds have to intervene in some way, but of course any intervention there would be seen as political. Is there anything that could be done in terms of cutting out all this cancer?
Well, I think that the idea that the CBC can investigate itself effectively in this is a bit erroneous, and there's been suggestions that the Ministry of Labour needs to get involved. I think that's not a bad idea. To the question of changing the culture itself, there are many voices on your network on Sun who will call for the privatization or the demolishment of the CBC. I very strongly disagree with that. I think that voices within the organization, voices like Lyndon McIntyre's, who have no truck or interest in this celebrity culture that's come up, but absolutely see it as their role as public broadcasters who taxpayers taxpayers give money to every year so that they can report the news, those people need to make their voices known and reclaim the institution, which belongs to each of us. It does not belong to Ghomeshi, to Heather Conway, to any of these people or their reputations who seem to use the place as their playpen. It belongs to every Canadian. So it's got to come from the people who are serious within the organization. It's got to come from the public as well, who shouldn't be calling for the place to be disassembled, but should be calling for the place to actually represent their interests and report the news that matters to them.
Is there not a sense of irony here that here is an organization that a lot of people see as being very above everyone else as far as media goes in the country? And look, we take things seriously and we do things by the book, but here we are with a situation about something as superficial as celebrity culture and all of this infighting. There seems to be a lot of, well, stuff that's not, let's say, consistent with good journalism.
Well, I know that there's many voices in the private media have and perhaps rightly so, a bee in their bonnet about CBC's snobby attitude towards the rest of the media. I think the brand is taking a battering right now, and I think that the ability for anybody in that institution to place themselves, above the hoi polloi, if that were ever true, that's certainly going to be a casualty of this. The fact that there are big egos, there are big personalities who feel threatened by what's going on is not a big surprise to me. It's not a contradiction of my understanding of the place. And I've written about a real sharp divide in the culture there between some of these, on-air celebrity, supposed journalists, and a lot of it falls between radio and television, not completely, but there are people there who've had a pretty cushy ride for a long time, even as thousands of their colleagues get laid off and the overall quality diminishes. So I don't know why we need these personalities with their big salaries, and I don't see them breaking important stories. And I think there needs to be a restructuring, and it's that hopefully that will be the positive outcome of this.
Well, between the salaries and the size of the egos and the prestige, it's a picture that's being drawn. You're playing a huge part in drawing it. Jesse, thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the interest.